Hi, my name is Angela Breidenbach, and I go by Angie, and I am the Executive Director for the International Institute of Genealogical Studies. That's quite a mouthful. I'm also a multi-published author, screenwriter, speaker, and I have been in the publishing industry as a professional editor and author and speaker, teaching writing and publishing for about 20 years or more. And so what I wanted to share with you today is a little bit about the secrets to a successful writing career, about writing and publishing. This is kind of a big overview so that I can help anybody who is interested in writing in genealogy, whether it is blogs, articles, nonfiction, and fiction. You might also be interested in writing for education. And so I think it's a very important element of writing to be sure that you know what you're writing for and who you're writing for. When we write, we often think that everybody's going to read what we're writing, and that is not the case. And so it's a really good idea to know what your target market is. And a target market is who's the person who's likely to walk into a store or into a library and pick up your book off the shelf. And what is it that that person is trying to get out of it? Are they getting entertainment? Are they getting a great story? Are they getting education? Is it a how-to? Is it a memoir? And this is where we start to get into the different genres that you can do. And some of those mean, how do you switch the genre up? Sometimes to maybe mask your identity or mask the identity of somebody that you're writing about. Is that allowed? Is that possible? And the answer is yes. So some of the things that you're going to need to do as a writer, we're going to start big and go into the deeper elements of it. You're going to need to make sure that you define the schedule that you're going to write. Nothing gets written without a defined schedule. As a professional author who have signed many contracts, I have needed to tell them when that book is going to be done. It is super important that you look at your big broad schedule and then back it down. So the way that I do this, especially if I was going to do a family book or something that has no real deadline, but it's a deadline for me personally, it's a deadline for somebody maybe I made a promise to. It's really important to take a look at your annual schedule in when you're not going to be available first. Is it because of work? Is it because of family promises? You're going to watch children, grandchildren, or elders. I know some people share their parents. They go stay for a couple of months at one sibling's house, a couple of months at another. That's going to make it difficult if you're doing elder care or childcare during that time where it's a dedicated time period. So you want to take that schedule and be aware of it. Mark out holidays, family occurrences, special events, travel, all of those things that are important. One of the things people forget is their regular work schedule. So make sure you have that in your writing schedule, because if you work 4 days a week and you work maybe 4 hours that day, you may be more tired than if you're going to be working just weekends. Some people have weekend jobs, but if you're working a full-time job, you're going to be really tired and have to preserve what creativity you have. Another tip for creativity when you're trying to think of how you're going to write on the big view is to make sure that you are feeding yourself properly, because for your brain to work, your brain actually works on sugar. And that sugar isn't chocolate, oh, I wish. It isn't soda, oh, I wish. But it is what is turned from your bloodstream into sugar that your brain can consume. So if you're exhausted, quite often it's because you might need some protein or some good nutrition to be able to get your blood thinking again in your brain. Sorry, getting your brain thinking again from the food that's in your brain. And then you also need to make sure that you get up and walk and give yourself thinking time. One of the hardest parts of an author's job in creativity is thinking time. And sometimes it looks like you're not working when you are. You might be thinking, and thinking is hard work and it eats up the sugar in your brain. So those are some things that people just don't think about. They're not aware of. They don't think that that's part of a writer's job, but it is. And for me, the odd times when great ideas have come to me for writing, whether it is just how a character is going to be put together, or how a certain sentence, I've been spinning it in my head for a while. I might be out for a walk or driving in the car because for some reason, certain mechanical activities free up your brain, and I'll let it percolate and it will bring it forward. So those are just some tips for the overview of writing that I think are helpful when you're starting it. Making sure you've done your schedule, done your goals for what you're working toward. And then another part of that is going to be what kind of a book you're going to write. Because if you're writing one for someone just to preserve on the shelf, for yourself, for your family, I hesitate using the word just, forgive that, because any book, anything that's preserving history, that's giving something like that as a gift to your family is special, unique, and important. I really believe in preserving history and family history. So that's why you'll see me doing this job. So I think it's crucial whether you're planning on selling it commercially, giving it as gifts, or having it preserved in a library or an archive. It's really important that you understand what that book is that you're going to do. And some of the things that I think help do that in the planning are maybe you're going to jot down your ideas for the book. You're going to need to know what that book is about. And here's one of the problems that writers run into. They want to put everything into the book, and I'm very guilty of that. So your first draft is never your last draft. In fact, it usually takes me 3 drafts to write a book. The first draft is what I call my skeleton. And when I build my skeleton out, I literally write 2 or 3 lines of what that chapter is about. And then I skip down and start a new chapter. And in that next chapter, I write 2 or 3 more lines. That helps me see the plot. And the plot is going to need to be there, whether it is fiction or nonfiction. So I'm using a little bit of creative license with plot. So the plot is what the story is about. If you're writing nonfiction, you may have a table of contents. You could consider that your plot. You're going to want your table of contents to lead the reader through to a full logical conclusion. And often what happens when we sit down to write is we include everything. And there's a word that I can never forget because it is such a funny word to me, but it's pedantic. And when I first started writing, I was very pedantic. I wrote in every single movement, motion, thought, anything that character was doing. And what we don't need in a book is play by play, blow by blow. For whether they're walking down the street, there has to be a purpose for the walking down the street. Are they running to help put out a fire? Are they walking down the street because they've just been evicted from their land? They were Irish and they were being evicted from their land by who had taken over the land. And so it's really important that there's a purpose behind every action, everything any character says. And a character is a character, whether they're real or fictional. And so when you build out your character, you need to know who they are holistically. And so this is important in family history and in genealogical science, because if you don't know who they are, you don't know their motivations, you don't know what has really happened to them in the world, you're not building anything more than what you call a paper doll, 2-dimensional. So when you're creating a character, you want to make sure that that character is not just 2-dimensional, not just 3-dimensional, but that character is also someone who is holistic and wholly dimensional. So when you are wholly dimensional, this is where social research, family research, historical research all comes into play. It is super important that all of these people have as much that you can know to create a character. So if you are involved in building out a character, make sure that you have taken the time to learn who that person is, what they experienced, even how they may have spoken. One of the problems that people of, let's say, the opposite sex have is that they haven't walked a mile in the shoes of that other person. So if I were to write a story about my husband, I would need to study him intently and listen to the words he says, watch his motions, his activity, the way his body works, and watch for when he is, what triggers him to be, let's just say, loving and sweet. Like, we have grandchildren, so he's very loving and sweet with those little babies. But what might trigger him to get angry? What might trigger him to be indignant? What makes him tick? This is what's important in creating a character, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or even a person from your ancestry. It is really important that you understand what makes them tick. And this is where, if you're just reading the overview of a census, or you're just reading a newspaper article, but you don't put it together with who that person is, who their family was, what was their station in life, what kind of a job did they have, what church did they go to, what did they believe in, did they have anything that they said that was either, sometimes newspapers will quote an ancestor, maybe they wrote their own diary, there's a journal, there's a lot of places where you can pick up on who that person really is by the things that they said or wrote, or what was written about them. And it's important for you to study those things to create that character. So you would create a character sheet, and you could ask your character questions. It's a common trick for writers to do, to interview their characters. So you're going to interview your ancestor. And yes, you're not going to be sitting there with them live because they're your ancestor, but you can still ask them these questions. And if you don't know the answers to that, that's where your ancestral research comes in, where you start figuring out who they are. So for instance, I had a great grandfather who was at one point, he was a linen rag cleaner, R-A-G, rag cleaner. And he would go around to businesses and collect their linens and rags. He would take them home, he would clean them, and he would redeliver them. There was an ad in a newspaper that said J.A. Nelson, and then it had rag and linen cleaning in the newspaper. And suddenly this business disappeared. Why did it disappear? I did not know. So I started researching, and this is when I had to expand to social and family history and finding out these things. And a member of his family had done something that embarrassed him deeply and went to jail for that. And that embarrassed him so deeply that he closed down everything and he moved several states away. And he didn't just move, he moved all of his family. Now, this is significant. So this is something where the newspaper article alone wasn't enough. It's when I had to expand and build out. So the questions on my character sheet were blank until I found out some of those answers, right? So when we find that out, and we find out that there was a sudden move, then we start to ask the question, why? And there's a really good technique in writing about that for characters, which is, it comes out of comedy of all things. And it's always say yes. So if you can say yes, say yes. And the other one is, if then what? So if he moved, what happened next? If he moved, why? And when you start to ask those questions, you start to fill in their social history and are able to potentially project the reasons why, to give you something to write about. Well, people think then, well, but what if it's not true? Okay, that is an excellent question. You're going to go back, you're going to do your research, you're going to find your citations, you're going to understand all that, you've got your research all together, and you're going to have to come to some conclusions. And some of those conclusions are going to be fed by what was happening in society at that time. How was language used at that time? What were the laws of that time? What was common in the social mores of that time? And so, for instance, in another book I wrote about my grandfather and grandmother, my grandfather was a widower, and he had been very short-time widower. And somebody came back and said, they wouldn't force a young widower to remarry that fast. Well, that's because they're looking through the rosy-colored glasses of today's social morals. That's not what it was back in that day. And so it was really important for me to contact that person who is asking that question and say, yes, this is exactly what happened, and I have the proof of it. Here's my research, and here's why that happened. If we look back in history, we understand that there was a lot more need and expediency involved in why partnerships or marriages, business deals were done than maybe they're done today. And we have to understand the laws and the times in order to put ourselves in the shoes of that person that we're writing about. Okay, so if you're going to, does anybody have any questions on that really quick? On filling out, understanding a character. Okay, I'll come back and look for questions if you think of them. All right, so when you're jumping into writing a book, you also need to know, are you going to publish that book yourself, which is called indie or self-publishing? Are you going to do some sort of a hybrid where you use a company to help publish that book? But sometimes those are also called vanity presses because they charge you a lot of money for stuff you can do yourself. But if it's the one time you're only ever going to publish a book, you're going to want to look for someone who's legitimate in that field. There is a couple of places that are very helpful for that. I really love the organization called, you can find it at selfpublishingadvice.com, and it is the Alliance of Independent Authors, and their short acronym is ALLI, A-L-L-I. It comes out of Great Britain, but it's a worldwide organization, and they have what they call a watchdog list for people who take advantage of writers who don't know what they don't know and get financially taken advantage of. So I really suggest that you look for that watchdog list. And it's very important to help you in avoiding being taken advantage of financially in the writing and publishing world. Okay, so if you're going to traditionally publish, that is a whole different animal and a whole different teaching. But I think it's really important to understand that traditionally publishing means that you're going to need an agent. Some will still take a manuscript that isn't agented, but it is very uncommon anymore because the doors into traditional publishing have slowed down and closed a lot. And it's often determined because of economics and things like that, but you have to first query agents. And that can take months to years. I got my agent, which we're no longer together. She's no longer my agent. We're still really good friends. But because I moved into genealogy and doing what I'm doing here, I no longer need an agent. She handles anything that was done prior. But I got my first agent in 2007, and I loved her to death. And she helped me to publish in historical fiction and historical fiction romance. And you can see some of the books that I've had come out. It's important when you're doing a book, if you're going to be an indie published book, that it looks like a traditionally published book. And I'll show you a little bit of what a book should look like so that you understand. This one is a traditionally published book from Barber Publishing. It has a spine that is well designed. It has a front cover that's well designed, and it has a back cover well designed. And it has the barcode that goes on the back cover. And when a traditional publisher does your book, they also provide the ISBN, which is an international book number. It's an international standard book number that's used all over the world to sell that book. Every different format your book comes in, whether it's paperback, whether it is hardback, whether it's an ebook or an audiobook, they all have an ISBN. And I'm going to try to show you right here. This right here is the ISBN number. And then this number right here, it usually starts with a 5, and then it tells you what the price of the book is as a general rule. If this number's missing and it says 9,000, that is a clue to retailers and librarians that it's a self-published book and that the person doesn't necessarily know what they're doing. And so that's kind of a red flag to avoid. There's ways to create this barcode on the back that makes sure that this 9,000 number is not there and that it has the 5 plus the actual retail price of your book. Do you have to sell the book for that retail price? No, not necessarily. You can raise the price on different entities that you sell it on, you can lower the price, you can do sales, there's all sorts of things, but you have to have a general price that is pretty standard, that it would be competitive around the world. There's also something to notice. This one is a very high-end paperback book, and it's got deckled pages. This is called deckled pages, and it has a flap that opens up and it has artwork inside. This is a very high-end type of a paperback book, which is very nice. And for the price of $14.99 US, it's really nice for a high-end book. So that one is done by a traditional publisher. The other thing I'm going to show you is that inside your book, you're going to have your title page. And this is very important on how you put your book together, because if it just goes straight to the first chapter, then they also know that it's not following traditional or industry standards, whether you're doing it into your traditional. Then it has a little bit more of a title page that has the authors on it. And then this right here is your copyright page. This is very important. And inside the copyright page, probably another time we'll teach on copyright pages in the copyright class, but it includes what rights are allowed to that publisher, whether it's yourself or some other. And in this case, it tells you even how do you get to use quotations from that book if you want to use that in teaching. It tells you the contents. In this case, there are 9 stories in this book, and mine is just one of them. And then there is a cover page because there's 9 stories in this book. This is an excellent example for what you might do if you were doing a specialized biography of different ancestors in your family, or if you were doing a biography that followed, say, all ship captains of a particular shipping line. You could do individual stories about that person's life, and you could put them all into one book like this. Now, you probably don't want to do the deckled pages because that's very expensive, but standard paperback would be a very good way to do that. And because it would be something like 9 stories of shipping captains, it would be something that you might be able to interest people out in the big wide world, in the commercial world, to purchase. So you're looking for, am I going to sell this book to commercial? Am I going to gift this book to family and friends? So those are things that you need to know before you start, because you'll want to know what your budget is for that book if you're indie publishing. Indie publishing covers for books can range anywhere from about $50 to thousands of dollars, depending on whether or not you're actually paying for a photo shoot, or if you're using different type of art that's been blended together. These are different photos that have been blended together, and I'll show you that on an indie book in a second. So as you're going through, you're going to see that generally the first chapter starts on the right-hand side of the page, and that would be the case through the entire book. Now, certain times, certain publishers have started, because of the cost of paper or lack of paper thereof, they've started to go ahead and allow a chapter to start on the left-hand side of the page. It's becoming more common, but first book out, I'd probably try to follow the more professional version of interior formatting. And so what we're talking about right now is interior formatting, and you're going to see there is the sidebar here that needs to have a little bit of space, and there's a little bit of a gutter, they call it here, and they have a little bit different sizing. How do you get that interior design? There's a tool that it depends. There's a couple tools. I'm on a Mac, so I use Apple products mostly. I do that because I really like the design programs that I can use on it. And I use a tool that I got from vellum.pub. It is VELLUM.pub. And you purchase a program that you download, an app on your computer, and you're able to design the interior to look like what you want it to look like. I'll show you a couple things that can do for you. This one, I think. When you design your own interior cover, interior design, you're able with Vellum to add photos. This book is about a huge fire, so the first page has smoke on it. It's really cool. Something that I could do using Vellum. Now, if you're on PC, you can use Vellum, but you have to use it in the cloud. It's a lot easier to use another program called Atticus, 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 and it's for PC users. You can use it also on Mac, and it's up and coming. It's trying to be directly competitive with Vellum. Another tool that I use for interior design, but also for writing my books, is called Scrivener, Scrivener, Scrivener. And that is a writer's tool. One of the things I love about Scrivener for genealogy is that when I'm writing my books, so for instance, this is the Queen of the Rockies series, and you can see I have fully designed it. On the back, it has exactly what it needs. It's got its ISBN, it's got its barcode properly placed and embedded into the back cover. And the back cover is designed properly with a logo. The spine is designed properly. And then the front cover, again, by the way, this has got one major photo that I purchased as a one-time. I can only use this photo. No one else can use this photo. I purchased it from the photographer. And then I've used a specified font, and this font follows the series. So this is book 1. This is book 6. So you can see the font and the style from book 1 to book 6 are the same. Making sure that if you're going to follow your family in a genealogical story, whether you do, or a genealogical series, whether you do it in historical fiction format or whether you do it in nonfiction, you want your covers to be stylistically the same. Now you can see the colors have changed to match the characters and the story theme, but you can see the style is the same all the way through the 6-book series. Now this one, it's really, you want to look for elements that match a character. A lot of people, when they're doing genealogical stories, it's not wrong, but they try to use too small of a photo and then design around that. It's very difficult to use that and have it be something beautiful that pops on the shelf or on the screen in a thumbnail that you see on like Amazon or something like that. Using a photo that's pixelated. Pixelating means it blurs because the amount of dots per square inch are too small in the photo. So it's really important when you're publishing to make sure that the photo is large enough so it doesn't blur all through your book cover, and that it's visible even in the size of a thumbnail on the screen or on your phone, because that's what people are really looking at, what they're buying from. So this character plays the harp. I couldn't believe I found a photo that had it in it. And this character is a Victorian 1889 character. And so you can see that she really kind of fits that, the tone of what she's doing fits it. And there's some light around her and it pops off of the cover. This is important, that there's light and dark elements in your cover that fits the tone of what's inside the book. What are they going to get? Your cover is the promise of what they're going to get. If you use a pixelated, blurry photo just because, oh, that's that real person, it's going to make it more difficult for the reader to be, let's say, entranced and want to enter the book because it's blurry and it's hard to look at. So think about that. Can you either design or find a photo that can represent that person or era that you're writing about? And then can you combine those together to make them, so for instance, this one, I bought the photo of her and I designed the first one. I had somebody else design this one. And she followed the same thematic style that I was using, but this hat didn't belong in there. The smoke behind it was a whole different photo and element that they put in. The colors of her suit are completely different than the photo that I purchased. And the background photo is something that is a third photo. So you can combine photos together to really build out an eye-catching book cover. And the book cover, oh my gosh, it's 70% of the sale. So it's really important your book cover is gorgeous, because if your book cover is not, they'll never pick it up to see what's inside and see your gorgeous writing. Okay, so there are some other elements to it. There are some acronyms, some jargon that they use in writing and publishing that I think it is really important to tell you about. So if you're in, say, the US market, there is a thing called ABA, and that is the American Booksellers Association. And basically in the writing world, that means secular or non-religious. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that your book can't have religion in it. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking to a different element of readership and bookstore. And there's another thing called CBA, which is Christian Booksellers Association. And what they're talking about is whether or not that bookstore is going to carry it is probably Christian bookstore. There's probably a lot more of specific religious elements in that book. Now, when we're talking about holistic for your character, it doesn't matter which one of these you want to use. You just want to make sure that your character is whole, that you include what did they believe? What did they think? What did they feel? Who were they? And particularly if you've been in our genealogical classes at genealogicalstudies.com, you know that a lot of these records and a lot of the important detail, including the detail of whether or not they went through trials and whether or not they had, they were being punished sometimes, did go through for centuries through the church. So if you were to leave that out of your story, you'd be back to the paper doll and they wouldn't be a fully fleshed out character. So in writing your story, you've done your character design and you've interviewed them. You have done your skeleton design of your book, understanding what you're going to talk about in each chapter of your book. And then you've started to flesh it out. And when you flesh it out, that's when you're putting in how did they speak? What kind of words would they use? Please don't use today's language and lingo for yesterday's language and lingo. Please don't use the way a woman might express herself compared to the way a little boy might express himself. They're two different characters. And in order to make them believable, you need to use the language that that person would use, regardless of who or what they are. That has to fit that character. So some of the different acronyms, like we're talking about ABA, CBA, and you can think of that around the world when you're writing internationally as, am I reaching out to a secular audience or a faith-filled audience? What faith is it? Is it Anglican? Is it, are you doing something that is maybe Lutheran in Germany and Lutheran in the US? They're very different audiences. If you're looking at some country where the religion was a state-sponsored religion, it's very different from where all religions are kind of mingled and jumbled together, but not state-sponsored, but anybody could go. So if, let's say, if I were going to the Anglican church, I might have a different worldview than somebody that is Buddhist going to a Buddhist temple. And so it's important to honor the character for who they are as you write them. Okay, so as I come up to more jargon besides ABA, CBA, things like that, I'm going to try to remember to tell you what that is and what that means. When you're looking at genres, there's fiction and nonfiction as these big genres, right? But inside fiction, it's a perfect place for genealogical writing because you can fill out and use a little bit of writer's license, right? Your literary license goes in there where you can possibly believe what somebody might have said. So for instance, when I wrote about my grandparents' romance, I was not in the room with them to hear them before I was born, but I'm going to put them in a situation and what would be a natural human reaction? What would a natural human wording be for that, that person to say, especially if there is jealousy going on. So, so for instance, I think it is this one. If there's jealousy going on, where I think happened in this one with my grandmother, my grandfather's first wife was my grandmother's cousin. She had died after 15 years of marriage, childless. And then my grandfather and grandmother were forced to marry due to town gossip. True story. got that from people that were involved in the town at that time. Then what happened was my grandmother had 3 children, and I am the daughter of her 3rd child. Okay, would I have known any of that if somebody else hadn't told me? No. If I hadn't started asking questions, interviewing people that were around it. I interviewed my grandma, my grandpa, and their very close friend who used to rent an apartment from them when they were married. And that's the person who told me that they got married because of town gossip. And I did a little more research. So this is where you're going to start finding out sometimes fiction fits better than nonfiction. So in this case, my grandma displayed something to me. When I was a teenager, I asked her from a beautiful oval, it was a beveled oval glass, who's that picture of that pretty lady in Grandpa's room? And her response was, oh, that's Rose. Now, what would that tell you, right? It would tell you there's something going on inside my grandma, and she's a little jealous of that lady in that picture. And that was where a lot of the story came from, and where I started asking a lot of questions. So it's important to me that I was not going to be able to use nonfiction in a way to portray some of those emotional elements that are important to understanding my grandma and grandpa's love story. They were married 54 years. I wanted to honor that. And I wanted to honor that they had a good marriage. But no marriage is perfect, and every marriage has its ups and downs. And so in honoring that, I also changed the time frame and a little bit of the people around it in order to protect people who are still alive today. I did not want to hurt anyone's feelings. And that's an important element of being a professional genealogist. So I have kept some of that story to come out at a later time. But for now, I'm happy with the way it turned out in fiction, because I can always use that literary license element to it and allow myself to hide a little bit of mystery where I'm not ready to reveal it. And I think that's important in the story of an author, that an author is writing. Are you writing a report? You also want to make sure that that report is legible. One of the reasons we're going through every single one of our courses slowly, painfully slowly, as we're editing all of these courses for better readability for our students. In report writing, you want it to be better readability. And if you use jargon, please define it for your client, because it's really important that they're able to understand what you're telling them, but not just what they understand that you're telling them, but that they can then turn around and tell that family history and that story to their family. It's only going to be that way if they understand what's in that report. So use real language, but also make sure that your grammar and your syntax, all of your storytelling that's in there, or your nonfiction that's in there, is readable. They're short, concise sentences as a general rule in a report. Please don't do run-ons with and please don't forget your commas. It's not because you want to be a grammar police, but it's because you want to make sure that what you have written is not only readable and understandable, but then tellable by your client to other people so that they can preserve family history too. In fiction, there's contemporary. And so you could be telling, say, your own story, but you put it to fiction. You could do historical, suspense, and thriller. You can use that because maybe you're telling the history of, let's say, a black sheep in your family. And that suspense thriller can be a phenomenal story. There's a lot right now out that is in the genre of genealogical mystery. So what you might call a cozy mystery. And that means that there's not a lot of garish blood and violence and all that kind of stuff, but that you're following the mystery, and the mystery is the driver through that story. If you're writing romance, biblical, missional, some people are on a mission. That doesn't necessarily mean religious mission. Sometimes they're on a mission to change the world. Sometimes they want to make sure pets have the best pet food. Whatever it is, they could be writing a book about how to provide for your pets in the best way. Was one of your ancestors a horse trainer? That would be a great story to tell. And would their life be the mission to care for and train horses properly? But what if they were trying to also train the owners of those horses properly? That's something very important in caring for your animals. And so I think that you could use some sort of a missional style in your fiction. Is it Western, prairie, Amish, military, fantasy, sci-fi? There's a lot of fun that you could use in what if scenarios in fantasy and sci-fi. So you don't have to be locked into, I have to tell this biography about my person. You can have fun with it, tell their story, make it digestible and entertaining. And then you can always put a little author's note like I do in the back of my books. This Queen of the Rockies series, it's all about 1889 to 1910 in Montana. It's about how Montana became a state. And what was fun for me was reading the journals of these people and then putting fictional characters in, because I didn't have enough to flesh out the full characters. I put in fictional characters that carried the story, that interacted with all of those real people from Montana's history. So it's an entertaining read while you're still getting real history. That is a great way to be able to preserve your own family history. If you don't know enough about that character, you can always put them into other stories as well. And you can do those smaller biographies. And there's also children's literary and YA, which is young adult. And young adult is supposed to be written for like 12 to 18, but in all reality, it's really more of a 16 to 24 age range. Think of it more like that. And so you want to be a little cautious when you get into that. If you're trying to do something that's clean, be sure that you're aware of what the style and what the genre is calling for. In nonfiction, you can write poetry, articles, you can write Christian living, you can write self-help, you can write Bible studies, memoir, biography, curriculum, which we do here at the Institute, marriage, parenting, how-to, homeschooling, cookbooks, gift books, cards, church bulletins, newsletters. There's so many nonfiction options out there. Are you going to write a book? Are you going to write an article? Sometimes just sitting down to write an article, you've got too much information, you realize it's a book. Sometimes when you sit down to write a book, you don't have enough information, you realize it's an article. And that doesn't mean it's a 500-word article. It could be a 3,500-word article. And knowing what platform it is that it's going to sell on. You could also do your own magazine or newsletter writing. So I think it's important that you're aware that there's much more available out there than just the biography or memoir. If you're going to write articles, it's really nice to start blogging first if you've never done it. And if you haven't taken journalism or something like that in your past, it's really nice to start blogging, to start writing some newsletter articles, because you want to know what is of interest and you start to hone your writing craft as you do these smaller things. A lot of people have been able to take blog articles or magazine articles and create books because of the topic of that, whether they go into nonfiction or they give them the outline of their plot or their story. That's really helpful. You can join group blogs. So maybe somebody's in a same name group with you. Maybe somebody's doing a same place group with you. You can write, share different articles, maybe different days of the week or 1 week a month. I've been in different things like that for years where I would do blog writing with partners, and some of them were on how to write. Some of them were on Montana, on history. Some of them were on genealogy. It just depended on the blog group that I was in, and you can form your own. And we encourage you to do that here at the Institute. You can find others that are like-minded, and maybe your expertise is on one topic, yet it's in the greater topic. I can only tell you what I know. So let's say I'm trying to learn about Scotland. And so I went to Scotland and I did a lot of research on going to Scotland. Would I be able to find gluten-free food? Because I'm gluten-free by necessity, not by choice. And so I did a series of articles on my blog about finding gluten-free food in Scotland. So to me, that was really fun. But let's say you wanted to get together with somebody else doing blogs on Scotland. Maybe mine would be, I'm the foodie. Maybe somebody else is the musician. Maybe somebody else is the architecture. You see how you can build that together with different expertise and yet do a group blog and not have it all land on your shoulders. So when you're rough draft editing, I mentioned at the beginning, okay, I better stop and ask. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat or let me know real quick. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on, and I'll also stop again at the end and let you ask some questions. 3 to 5 drafts for a book is normal. If you're trying to put out the book you've written with the first draft, it is not going to be professional. It is not going to be normal. It's not going to be readable. I know everybody thinks that what they've written is either too scary, I can't put that out there, or it's perfect. The reality is it's somewhere in between. You want to write your draft. I do my skeleton draft, and then I go back through and I fill out more information on it. And then I go back through and I add colorful details and really agonize over every single sentence. And I make sure sometimes the things that really help is making sure you've written with your 5 senses. For example, you could do a snippet that says, he just brought Mara home from the hospital. Well, that doesn't, and her neighbor made dinner. That doesn't really help you because it's not something that you can feel, smell, taste, be a part of. It's not memorable. It doesn't draw you in. And so if you were to then say that in a way that uses your 5 senses, you could expand that into a story. He just brought her home from the hospital. Her neighbor made dinner, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And now maybe some of that cheatin' chili would be a good thing for you. He had to get that recipe card for his mother's collection. That spicy aroma triggered sudden hunger signals. Joel's stomach rolled. He jumped on a plane out of LAX after an early breakfast, landed before lunch, and ended up in the hospital with his newest client for the rest of the day. It'll help combat the effects of that medicine if you have a full stomach. Joel started to follow the others into the kitchen. He stopped at the small sound of a snore. She didn't. He turned back. Mara's head tipped back in her recliner swing back. He watched for a second. Yes, there it was. Another small snore, and a puff at the end finished it off. He resolved never to tell her. No way, no how would the proud and mighty Mara Keegan take kindly to a fall from dignity. He grinned and went in for dinner. Well, maybe he'd never tell her. Or maybe they'd laugh about it. No, he'd probably never tell her. Do you see how adding in a sound and a smell helps the scene fill out, helps the scene be something you can see happening? And it's really important then, this is a scene. What is the sequel? So when you write a scene and a sequel, a scene and a sequel. It's very important for fiction because it helps you to have the action and then the reaction. So this was in Joel's point of view. The sequel is, of course, going to be in Mara's point of view. And when she wakes up and realizes that there was food going on and noise going on, does she know she was snoring? Does he say she was snoring? Is that going to embarrass her? What is she going to say? Right? So I realize that's just a simple, silly sample, but it helps you understand that by having a scene, what happens in the action, and then having a sequel, what's the response to that, is part of your storytelling. A lot of people, I'm going to move on from there really quick. Oh, Christina's asking, what was the name of the watchdog group that helps self-publishers? That is, you can find it at selfpublishing.com, and it also is selfpublishing.org. Either one will get you there. And the group is called Alliance of Independent Authors, and they have a page on their website that is called Watchdog page. It's called Watchdog, and it's it'll help you with publishers, it'll help you with editors, it'll help you with marketers, it'll help you with self-publishing companies, and they'll tell you whether it's a red for it's not good, or yellow for caution, green for go. That's really helpful. Okay, so plotting versus pantsing. Some people think they can just sit down and write. Some people can. The plotters know where they're going. They know where the story is going to end, and they fill it in from there. I tend to be a combo. I will plot out my skeleton plot. I find that it's a lot easier to follow if I know where I'm going and I know what the ending is going to be. And then I can go fill in the detail, the conversations, the color of the dress she wore, what the weather was outside, if it's important to the story. And it can be very important to the story if you use weather as another character. And that's a little bit deeper writing skill. But for instance, if your character is super angry and the world is coming to an end in their life as they know it, it's really helpful to have dark, stormy lightning clouds and things like that going on. So you kind of try to match the weather, what's happening outside, to what's happening inside the character. It's very helpful in setting a tone of a scene. So scene and sequel, I'm going to tell you that again. It's what happens to incite an incident. What caused that problem or that joy? And then what's the character's reaction to that incident, that pain, that joy? And then being aware of the logical flow of events. And the logical flow of events is really important because if you're going to, let's put it this way, if I looked out the window and a mountain lion was coming to attack my little miniature horse, I'm not going to pull up the gun, shoot, and then scream. If the mountain lion's charging, I'm probably going to to the horse and then shoot, So there's just logical events that may not be exactly how it would go, but do you see what I mean? There's logical events. Sometimes when you get down to the nitty-gritty of those logical events, it's really important to break it down on paper so that you can move it around, because sometimes in our mind, when we write it out, we either leave out an element or we put them out of order. And then what happens is, even if we don't recognize it ourselves, the reader recognizes it and they don't believe our story. So logical sequence of events is just as important as the event. And then scene and sequel means this is what happened and this is the reaction to what happened. And so they're literally two different scenes in your book, and there's a break between those scenes, but you want to think when you're writing one, this is the inciting incident, this is what happened, this is what was, or this is what made me so joyful. And then you want to take a break, white space between, and then you're going to say, and this is how I reacted to that, or how my character reacted to that. Unless your first book is finished, you're not ready to submit to an editor or a publisher. It's really important that you have that book finished. If you're doing it on your own, you are not going to want to promise a date that it's done unless you're sure it's really done, because there are steps that need to go on in preparing for marketing your book. That's a whole nother class. We'll get to it another time. And then there are some great starter tools that you need to be able to write. There's some craft books that I would suggest. One that's really helpful, a friend of mine wrote, it's called Writing Fiction for Dummies. And it's one of the dummies books. It's yellow, and I think it's important to read that book if you are wanting to work out the details of how to fictionalize your ancestor's story or your story. And it's okay to fictionalize your own story too. It helps you to, it's therapeutic, but sometimes you're doing it because you want to help someone else. I did write a nonfiction book where I used creative fiction in it to help me to tell my own story in order to help others. So then you're also going to want to get the market guides for whatever genre you're writing in, a thesaurus, a dictionary, how to write a book proposal if you're planning on submitting that book to traditional publishing, to an agent or editor. And then that one is by Michael Larsen, Larsen, How to Write a Book Proposal. Really helpful. And then there's Writing the Breakout Novel by Donald Maass, Maass. That is a really good book. He's also got a book called Fire and Fiction. Those are very helpful books. We also have classes that you can take on writing and publishing and our professional development, and you can take them one-off if you're just interested in one type of writing or for what you're doing. And then if you're going to write stories for your clients, you really do need to understand the elements of writing. So there's another way to get great characterization, whether it's for yourself, your ancestors, or whatever. You might be able to take the test for them. It used to be called Strength Finders 2.0, and there's a code in there that you take a test. It's a personality test. I think they've changed the name on that one now, but it is it is an excellent way if you take a personality test for yourself or your client or your character in order to really capture the elements of their personality before you try writing them. And then it's really good to find what they call a foil or an adversary for them, because if there's no conflict in your story, there's no story. And when we're writing about biographies about our ancestors, what is the conflict that happened to them in their life that they overcame? Either that will inspire us, or that will tell us a cautionary tale so that we can avoid that trouble in our life in the future. So I know that was a very quick overview. I was trying to push about 20 years of stuff in an overview for you. And I plan to do more of these. So if this is helpful, if there's a particular element you'd like to learn, please let me know. And we'll try to add those into our professional development talks for you going into the future. And if there's one little element you don't understand and we can do a 2 to 10 minute video on it, we'll try to do that as well. You can find me, Angela Breidenbach, at angelabreidenbach.com. And you can find the International Institute of Genealogical Studies at genealogicalstudies.com. And you can also find our YouTube channel at Genealogical Studies. And we do have students that are on Facebook in a special students only, alumni and instructors only group on Facebook. So thank you for being with me. And if you have questions you'd like me to answer, I would be very happy to try to answer them for you now. And remember, we're still rolling on the recording. So if there's one you want to hold for after, that's okay. So Anita asks, is there somewhere that the Institute has a list of the blog websites that students have so that we can easily find each other's blog to read, share, and support fellow students? Wow, what a great idea. I would be interested in reading the other students' teachers and blogs. So there is not currently, but there will be soon. And so I know the new website is, oh, thank you, Heather. She says it's very interesting and helpful. Thank you. So coming up on the new website, which I know it's coming out, I'm hoping this summer. It's taking a little longer because we're moving 25 years of legacy data. That's a lot. And so anyway, on the new website, there are blogs available to students to start. Do we have one? No, we don't have a way of doing that right now. However, we are working on, our blog is down right now. We're doing some work on it. When we do bring it back up, we will be very interested in having students do blog posts for us about whatever their expertise or their interests are. And then they could put their bio and they could put a link to their personal blog in there. That would be one way we could do it. And I'd be totally happy to have students share their blogs inside the student group on Facebook. So thank you so much. And if there are no other questions that are going to go on the video, I'm going to go ahead and stop. Remember, you can find us at genealogicalstudies.com. We're also on Twitter. And we're so glad you joined us today. Thank you. I hope that was at least a helpful introduction to the big wide world of writing and publishing.